I'm Traci Austin, your host of the People Strategy Podcast. This show provides interviews with organizational leaders and ongoing coaching experiences that highlight elevating people in organizations through a people strategy roadmap.
Hi, I'm Chad Franzen from Rise 25. Today, I am the host of the People Strategy Podcast, where we dive into the latest trends and best practices in talent management and organizational development. This episode is brought to you by Elevated Talent Consulting, a leading provider of comprehensive talent management solutions. Whether you're looking to optimize your recruitment process, enhance your employee engagement, or develop effective leadership strategies, Elevated Talent Consulting has the expertise to level up your team. Discover how they can transform your workforce at elevatedtalentconsulting.com. Traci Austin is a certified HR professional with over 2 decades of experience in building HR departments for small businesses from the ground up. Traci is dedicated to creating an environment where every employee can find fulfillment in their work while achieving business outcomes. Her expertise in employee development, performance consulting, and coaching has made her a highly sought-after consultant in the HR field. As the chief strategy consultant and owner of Elevated Talent Consulting, a certified women-owned business, Traci has significantly impacted small businesses and HR professionals. She hosts the popular podcast, the People Strategy Podcast, which reaches thousands of HR professionals and business leaders globally. Hey, Traci, thanks so much for joining me today. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for the conversation.
Hey, today we're gonna talk about the employee value proposition, which is kind of a specialty of yours there at Elevated Talent Consulting. Why don't you give me a broad definition of what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So what the employee value proposition is it is very simply, why are you a great place for an individual to work at? And here's the thing with an employee value proposition. And this is something that I think some of our clients have definitely struggled with. You want to turn away as many applicants as you want to attract with your employee value proposition, because really what you're doing is you're naming why you are a great place to work and what that individual will experience within your workplace. And all workplaces are not created equal.
Well, that's very interesting. Do you think most places think about that as they post jobs?
No, most of the time I just see a job description posted that is like, here's the job duties, maybe, that's been copied and pasted from some ad on Indeed, right? And it's like, hold on a second. There are thousands and thousands of accounting positions available, or, machine operators or whatnot. So why choose you, right?
Sure.
And so the employee value proposition is really about the organizational values, those mission of the organization, the vision. What does it feel and look like to work in your environment on a day-to-day basis?
So when coming up with an employee value proposition, what are some things that an organization should think about when considering why someone should want to work there?
Well, I love to ask your people or our people, whatever that is, right? So one of my favorite things to do when we're coming up with an employee value proposition is to do a climate survey and really asking the team, what do you love about the organization? What don't you love about the organization? What are those key items that really make this a great place to work? I don't know if you've ever had the experience where you were sold a bill of goods and you get into whether it is a job, whether it is a relationship, whether it is, a product or service with a provider, and you're like, this is not what I was sold. And then you kind of feel like that you were duped in a way. The goal with the employee value proposition is that it is true for today, not that it is this like visionary of what we want to be. It is what is actually happening in our organization today that makes us a great place to work.
So why is it important for an organization to do that kind of self-examination?
It's important because if individuals are not a cultural fit for the organization, they will leave. right?
Gotcha.
And so it's really important that we're attracting folks to our organization that are going to be able to support what it is we're doing, and we don't have conflict over values immediately. So, let me give you some examples of that. If you have a culture that is, we are a culture where we work so hard every single day that you go home with a headache. Okay, great. Some individuals want that culture. If you don't want that culture and you believe you're walking into an organization that has a fantastic work-life balance, and instead you're getting an organization that requires grind and drive, that is a very different type of culture. Now, are there organizations and folks that want to work in that type of culture? Of course. And that's fine. But if you believe you're looking for a work-life balance and that's what you're getting, now we have dissonance and a lack of engagement on day one.
So there are 4 elements of the employee value proposition, kind of a set of monetary and non-monetary benefits that an organization can provide. Why don't you tell me what those are, and then we'll kind of get into each of those individually.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we look at an employee value proposition, we've got the really common ones, right? We've got the common ones that I feel like every organization is talking about. And so the first one is compensation and benefits. I'm going to combine those into 2. I think we've got them separately, but compensation and benefits is one of those that it's going to attract an individual to an organization for sure. And a lot of times we hear individuals leave organizations based on compensation. I can tell you more than likely it is compensation's an easy excuse as to why we're leaving, that it's typically something else in combination with that. So when we look at compensation and benefits, what is that compensation story that you are specifically telling your team? And that becomes really important. So if we're in a nonprofit organization, our compensation story is probably going to lag the market because we're a nonprofit organization. There is an intrinsic need of folks, typically in nonprofits, that is really about the impact that they're making, knowing that it's going to be a little bit of a lower salary, right? So when we're putting together our employee value proposition, really think about what's that compensation story that we're telling. Are we telling a story that is, we are doing an exchange of time for money? Is that the value we put on you? Is you show up and you warm a seat, we're going to pay you for it? Or is it, we're in a value exchange? The greater value you provide, the greater salary you receive, bonuses and whatnot, is another way of looking at it. And so when we are creating that, it is really important how we're talking about it, especially with our benefits. If our benefits are things that include an unlimited PTO policy, which I will name I'm not in support of, but that's a different podcast and a different topic. But it is one of those whereas, hey, what is that time off? What does that look like? How do you support that? Are you an organization where you are doing things together as a team and you really value that team? You value training and development and learning. Those are all parts of the benefit package that you can really highlight. Yes, you have your health insurance, your dental vision, et cetera. But what are those things and how are you communicating that? Because that's a value that the individuals may not receive in other organizations.
So in terms of compensation and benefits, is that, you mentioned kind of telling a compelling story. Is that something that's most important for the candidates to learn, or is it just as valuable for the organization to learn if they hadn't thought about that up until working with you?
It's incredibly important for the organization to learn. And that's why we love starting all of the engagements that we do that are, if we're doing anything where we're setting up a people strategy roadmap and working with organizations on, we're going to set up your people strategy roadmap. We're going to connect you with a firm that we utilize because they do a much better job at recruiting than we do, but we do a really great job at setting up the structure around it, right? So when we're doing those things, the first thing we like to do is get the feedback of current staff. Because when we can use quotes of current staff and really understand what their experience is, because Chad, your or my experience is not the same as somebody in the organization for 20 years. And a manager experience will not be the same as a line level employee experience. So we want to gain that feedback from the team. And guess what? If we get really low engagement participation, that tells us that there's a lack of trust. Great. That is still data that we want, even if we didn't get a high participation score. Guess what? This is our starting spot. This is what we can start to do to listen and to implement some of those changes. But we want to be honest in our recruiting about what's currently happening.
So let's say there's a boss or a manager or whatever, and they discover like, wow, there really is a lack of trust here. Do they just move on and then post the job, or do they address that issue first? Or what's typically the process have you found for that?
You have to do an and both, right? I mean, you really have to do an and both. Can you slow down the recruiting process to go fix something? The answer is no, because what's going to happen is you're going to put more stress on your team by not having the resources in order to do that. So what that ends up meaning is, all right, we're going to start communicating some of the things that we are doing to really move the organization and people forward. And so with that being said, we're going to do the survey with our team. We're going to pull out the key pieces that are true, and we can always add to it later.
What should an organization think about regarding the jobs that it hires for in terms of team alignment?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to back up a second to move forward. When we're looking at engagement in an organization, and engagement is one of those items that we look at to say, how engaged is our team? So it's like this curve, right? It's the have to curve. I have to be here and I have to do this because I have to get a paycheck, and versus the want to curve that's like, I want to be here. I want to make the impact. I want to serve our clients, right? That gap between the have to and the want to curve is typically impacted by, is the person in the right role? Is the team aligned where we're turning up the strengths of each team member and not playing whack-a-mole on every single weakness, which I think many of us have seen, done, felt, been a part of, and go, that's not fun. And then is the leader leading me the way that I need to be led? And the culture, right? So the culture piece is what we're talking about within the employee value proposition, but culture also includes all of those other pieces. So when we're talking about team alignment, it's really important to understand what is the strategy that this team is executing on and the place and piece of impact that the individual coming in will play. Because if we don't balance those things out, and we have a whole bunch of people that like to move forward really fast and are very innovative, we're going to drive off the cliff. So we need to ensure we've got someone on that team that's kind of that brake pedal going, hold on a second, and that we embrace that strength of that individual.
A third element of the employee value proposition, we talked about compensation and benefits, is career pathways. Tell me what goes into coming up with that.
Absolutely. So if we think about this, one of my friends at Titus Talent Strategies, Jonathan Reynolds, talks about how right now it's every 3 years is the typical length of time that someone is in a job, right? Mm-hmm. So are we offering a job, or are we offering a pathway that is actually a career? So if we are offering a career, what we're doing is we're showing and supporting an individual to level up through the organization, grow their career, grow their compensation, grow their skill sets, and potentially grow their impact in the way that they want to impact. When we can do that, that sets us as an organization very, very differently than an organization across the street doing the same thing that's offering a job.
I wish somebody had done that with me. It would have changed my entire outlook on working for half the places I ever worked with.
Okay, Chad, tell me more about this, because I want to hear your story now.
Yeah, I apply for jobs, they look good at the time, and then you're there for a year, and kind of the light at the end of the tunnel starts to fade, and you're kind of just like, what's my vision here? What's their vision for me? And I don't think either party had ever thought about it up until that
Right.
point.
Yeah.
And
And then
then,
you're bored, right?
yeah,
Then you're
and then they say,
bored.
well, you have a job, so you should be thankful for it, or something like that.
Right. Well, guess what? There's lots of jobs out there now. And for our listeners, I really want you to think about this. There's a ton of jobs out there. And what is it that uniquely makes your organization and your leadership different that has folks say, I want to work for you and with you?
So
And that's one of those keys.
when does that career pathways conversation come up in the hiring process?
I ask it in the very first interview. Here's the 2 questions that I ask. Are you ready? You might want to write this one down, Chad, because
Okay.
these are fun. What is your, or blah, 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 we can cut that out. What is what's one item on your career bucket list? It's a fun question, right?
Mhm.
So Chad, what's one item on your career bucket list?
I would like to have my own podcast that is generated for marketing purposes.
All right. Hey, Dr. Jeremy, are you hearing this? Right? So you want to create your own podcast that's generating for marketing purposes. Amazing. And what's on your personal bucket list?
I would like to live in another country for at least a year.
Okay. So, hey, Dr. Jeremy, are you looking to expand globally? And could Chad do that from France for a year? Hint, hint, nudge, nudge, right? So no promises here. Have not talked to Dr. Jeremy about that. But the point of this is when we can get super curious about what it is that a person wants that motivates them, that then becomes a part of our one-on-one conversations between the manager and the employee. And guess what? We're 6 months in. Chad, you're phenomenal. I do not want to lose you. I know you've got recruiters calling you at least weekly, if not twice a week. What are those things that we can do that align? This is the key here, that align with the business results for the organization and with what Chad wants. This is 2 sides of the same coin. When we can do that, what we're doing is we're creating a career because we're creating opportunities. We're saying, I listen to you. I value what you're bringing to the organization because it moves the organization forward. And this fulfills a dream of yours. And guess what? If we look at the cost of turnover, what is the cost of this? And does it make business sense and create the loyalty and the trust of that employee?
Let's talk. That's some very interesting stuff. Let's talk about work culture. How do you kind of define work culture? And then I've never thought about this, but what should the culture of an organization do for that organization?
Okay. So 2 things. So I want to define it first. And I'm going to have you ask the question again. Okay. So if I'm going to define culture, there's 2 ways I like to define culture. One is, what does somebody do when nobody's watching? Right. The other way that I like to define it is your culture is the behaviors that you as the leader and leadership team allow or don't allow on a daily basis. And those 2 kind of compete with each other, but also support each other, right? It's the behaviors that happen when nobody's watching. And it is the behaviors that you as an organization allow or don't allow. So one of the things that we do with our clients is we look at, what are your core values? Let's put your core values in day-to-day behaviors. When we can put core values into day-to-day behaviors and make them 3D, because guess what? If your core values are just platitudes on a wall that nobody's actually following through on or paying attention to, they're not real. When we can have them kind of light up in that way, it allows us to really see them. And I did a podcast with Jeffrey Mold from, it was a hotel chain, Stony Brook. Took me a minute. But one of the things I loved about my podcast conversation with him was he said, look, if our values are not lived down the hall, they should not be on the wall. Or said a different way, if it's on the wall, it must be lived down the hall. I love that. Are those values lived?
So I've worked in places that had stated core values, and I think everybody just felt like that was something to make management feel good
Right.
about what they're
We
doing.
all roll our eyes at it.
Right. So how do you kind of get the employee buy-in?
Absolutely. So the way that we typically get employee buy-in, and there's a couple things here, right? If we're changing our culture, so we hear from our climate survey that I'm feeling bullied or harassed in this department. Okay. So that means there's a lack of trust in that department. Okay. So if we hear that and our core value is trust and inclusion or something along those lines, we know that we have a mismatch between the employee experience and what the core value is. So then what we are doing is we're figuring out what's going on. Now that's to a level that you probably need to do an investigation around it. Yet what we're going to do is the first thing we're going to do is talk to that manager or leader and figure out what's going on in this department that is having that. And what we find is sometimes the manager is so overwhelmed that things are coming across sideways and there's zero intention around it. It doesn't matter. It's what's being perceived. So we need to figure out a corrective action around it that supports the team and the organization and that leader. And I think one of the things when we start to look at, how do we get employees involved and enrolled in it is we enroll them in it, right? When we do a climate survey, we actually tell them what the results of the climate survey are. There's this beautiful thing called transparency that's most of the time doesn't happen. We actually tell them, this is what y'all told us. What do you want to do about it? Guess what? I don't know all the answers as a consultant. My leaders in the organizations we work with don't know all the answers. Their team has a lot of the answers of what they want, and then we can make a decision on that together. And sometimes we need to make a decision that we need to enroll them in after the fact on it.
So I asked you, what should culture do for that organization? What should the organization's culture do for that organization? What's your quick answer for that one?
Yeah. So an organizational culture should elevate the employee experience so that employees are engaged to meet the business results.
Great. So what, as you're trying to attract top candidates, what are some things that might go into making sure that a top candidate would be entering their ideal work environment?
The questions that you ask them, right? Mm-hmm. So what we want to do is we want to align the questions that we are asking to our core values and really listen into, what those key items are. And this is another question that I'm borrowing, giving credit to Jonathan Reynolds for. But, this question is a sales question. And, it's a question to ask a salesperson. And so the core value in the organization is relationships, or it could be, right? So a question for the salesperson might be, hey, what's the biggest sale you've ever made? And they tell you all about it. And then you say, all right, who helped you to get that sale? Because guess what? We all know that sales typically come through different relationships, somebody introducing someone to someone else or whatnot, right? Great. Awesome. So, Chad, referred this person to you based on the great work. Amazing. And that was the best sale you ever had. Awesome. What was your commission on that? And they tell you, you're like, amazing. How did you go back and thank Chad for that? Oh, I never did. Chad doesn't know. Right there, that tells me that that's a core value misalignment, and the interview more than likely is over. And if you're truly following your core values, the interview is over. And that's why, because their personal values and behaviors do not align with the core values of the organization.
How important is it to clarify kind of the environment in which the individual or the candidate will be working? Like the social environment, whether they're going to be working collaboratively with a team like all day. Can you handle that? Can you follow processes? Maybe you have to work quietly in one place all day. How important is it to establish all those things?
So there's a couple of things here. We utilize something in our business and with all of our clients called predictive index, which is a behavioral assessment. And so there are, each of us has natural behavioral drives that allow us to do the things that we do really well. And each job has a need for a behavioral style in order to do that job well. So one of the things that we do is we ensure that every candidate coming in is matched to the job that they're applying for to ensure that it's a great fit to the role. Within the organizational environment, one of the things that we do is we do a tour of the organization. If it's remote, we talk about what that looks like. An individual on my team, her name is Morgan, and she's amazing. One of the things Morgan says to me quite frequently is when people show us who they are, we have to believe them. And so it's one of those where when a candidate shows us who they are, we need to believe that and not put like, oh my gosh, but I think they're the perfect fit for this role. I should bring them in anyways. They just showed us who they are. If they're not a fit for the organization and the role, then we should not be bringing them in.
So I've worked for competing recreation centers in one town, and I know that each of them, especially one, tried to come up with ways to make sure that it was better than the competition in terms of what it offers to the customers. Should a organization or a company be thinking about why it's a better place to work than the competitor down the street or a competitor, in the market?
Here's my stance on this. If you're focused on what your competitors are doing, you're not focused on what your client and or your people need. And so is there some market analysis that's helpful? Of course it is. Absolutely. Do we do wage surveys and do we do all the things to see where we align with it? Of course we do. However, is that the primary focus? No. Because what is the differentiation that makes you different? And can you present that in a way that it is about you versus about putting someone else down? And so that's my stance on it. But that also lines into our values at Elevated Talent Consulting is that we're going to stand on the platform that we stand on and do our best at what we do. We are not for everybody, right?
Mm-hmm.
We are not for everyone. And if this is not for you, fantastic. There's that rec center across the street, maybe. And they're probably phenomenal in areas where we are not. But I'm not going to put them down for that. I'm going to attract the right people to us for who we are.
What about the opportunity for potential job candidates to attain skill development or have an opportunity to learn new skills or improve their skills? How important is that in the employee value proposition?
So depending upon the level in the organization, it becomes incredibly important. And this, I would say, goes hand in hand with the talent pathway planning and what we just talked about offering a career versus offering a job. That's going to be built out. What we have found, especially with the generation that's coming right out of college now, is if I can lay a talent pathway plan out in front of you, essentially a map that says accounts payable internship, AP specialist, AR specialist, accountant 1, accountant 2, and list. Here's the behaviors you have to show: critical thinking, problem solving. Here's the level of expertise you have to have: Excel, QuickBooks, Business Central, whatever it is, right? So it's skill set and behaviors for each bump. And there might be education certifications in there. When I can lay that out or have it on a SharePoint that everybody has access to, what we find is folks are going to go find that, do it, go through it, versus not having any idea what they need to do, because so often they're not going to ask.
What's a passive job candidate, and how can an organization ensure that passive candidate becomes active if they so choose to?
Yeah. So I'm going to talk about two types of passive candidates.
Mm-hmm.
I was talking with a potential client yesterday, And I said, yeah, do you have a boomerang program? And he's like, a what? And I go, the folks that have left your organization that you wish would come back, but you only give them one chance. We call those boomerangers. He's like, oh. He goes, what's the boomerang program? I said, in the exit interview, you ask them what they're most looking forward to in the next position because it tells you what you're missing here, right? And most often you already have it, but it's never been communicated. So, and that helps you develop your employee value proposition, by the way, hint, hint, nudge, nudge. So with that, boomerang is you do your exit interview, you know the things that they want in the current position that they're going into. Then you say, hey, what were the best things about here that you're going to miss? Now you have the two things that if they came together would probably make them incredibly happy. You follow up with them 30 days in. How's it going? Does it meet? Da, 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 da. They already told you the words in the exit interview. 60 days, 90 days, etc. Because guess what? You're paying attention to them in a way that they may want to come back. That's one way of looking at a boomerang. And that also creates a happy alumni pathway that they can boomerang back. So that's one piece, not quite a passive candidate, but how do we re-engage a candidate that we really enjoyed in our organization? The second one is a passive candidate is other individuals that are in your location in the same type of job that you have that you're like, man, I would love to attract them to us. So it's all marketing, right? What are we putting out on LinkedIn? What are we putting out in some of those areas? Adam from Potawatomi Bingo and Casino does a great job of this. And he talked about it on the podcast that we did together. And so, Chad, if we could link to that podcast, Adam does a great job of talking about the great things that Potawatomi does within their organization and really highlights that so that when he says, hey, we've got an IT position open on our team, they've been seeing consistently in the feed from Adam what Potawatomi offers.
Okay, great. Hey, the fourth element of the employee value proposition, we've got compensation, benefits, career pathways. The fourth one is organizational structure. Tell me why that's important.
Yeah, so the structure is important because there's some folks that work best in a really large organization, and there's some folks that work best in a really small organization. And when we can truly explain what that means, so for example, most of the clients that I work with are small, they're under 50, or they're growing and they've got some PE funding. Policies, procedures, structures are not in place. You're flying. Priorities change significantly and quickly. And with all of those things changing and kind of that dance for someone who's in a very large organization, a Fortune 500, Fortune 100 company where everything is laid out and the processes are there and the role has a great deal of depth, but not a lot of breadth to it. That's a culture shift within it. So understanding what that looks like, because that impacts the autonomy and the critical thinking that an individual has to have.
Last question for you. So the organization figures out its employee value proposition and has some positions available. How does that organization communicate the employee value proposition to those candidates?
Yeah, so this is where HR and marketing are so much of the same thing, right? And so we talked about passive candidates. What are our posts on LinkedIn? What are our posts that are going out there? What are our employees talking about, right? And when we can actually provide some marketing material or literature around that, it really helps. You know, I love naming here's a day in a life, right? Doing some videos around that. There's some great employee value proposition videos that are out there of who we are and videos of what it looks like inside of the organization. So that's a great way of doing it. You know, whenever we put out a job ad, it's a recipe, essentially. It's employee value proposition. Why are we a great place to work? And then it goes into very specifically, what are the behaviors that you need to have here in order to be a fit for the job itself? And then we get into what's typically on a job description. So that's the recipe that we follow that really funnels back into why are we a great place to work?
Okay, Traci, all kinds of great information, great content. Anything else that you'd like to add about the employee value proposition as we wrap things up?
This is actually session 2 of our team retention program. We have one of those that started in July. We have another one that will start in September. So if you're going, oh my goodness, I would love to get my hands on this content and create it and go deeper into it, check out our team retention program and see if that is a fit for you to join our next round.
Okay, awesome. Hey, Traci, it's been great to talk to you today. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Chad.
So long, everybody.
Thank you so much for listening today. I'd love to connect with you. If you'd like to connect, you can find me on LinkedIn at Traci, Traci Austin, and at our website at elevatedtalentconsulting.com. If you'd love to learn more about our process, please reach out to us. And again, thank you so much for listening and sharing your feedback with us through a review. Have a fantastic day.